I say boom, boom, boom. Now we're about to say way-oh, way-oh.
What is up, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Shine a Light podcast. Today is just me, but we are back with podcast number 9, maybe 10. I'm not quite sure how many we've got through, but today we're back. It's time to talk Formula 1, and there is a lot to dive into. Now, the Grand Prix this weekend may not have been the greatest that we've ever seen. Let's be honest, it was a bit of a snooze fest. Leclerc was the only crash, and Hamilton cruised to victory. Verstappen couldn't quite close the gap, but to be fair to him, the Mercs are so far ahead. However, there's still a lot to talk about. I want to talk about Sergio Perez, I want to talk about Racing Point and Lance Stroll, I want to talk about Pierre Gasly and the impact he's having, and could Sebastian Vettel be replaced halfway through the Formula 1 season? There's a lot to dive into. Make sure that you have gone and subscribed, and other than that, let's kick things right off. I was saying Catalunya review, but I reckon we can get through this in about 2 minutes. So let's kick it off by, first of all, just talking about what we thought of the race. Let's be honest, not great. And do we want to see Catalunya? I think it's under contract negotiations soon. On the grid for future seasons? Not really. It's a good testing track in the respect that you get the different aspects of the track, allowing drivers to get experience in different areas and allowing the cars to have an equal testing zone. However, when it comes to race day, there's not really enough of a variety of opportunity overtaking areas, and the issue of dirty air that makes this not the most exciting track that you've ever seen when racing, which to me is a bit of an issue. It's not quite there. I think there are better tracks out there that are not currently utilised, like say something like a Malaysia or an Istanbul, which isn't currently utilised, which would be more exciting than the current choice of Spain. It's not the only track there's issues, but it is one that is going to be pointed out today. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about is driver of the day. Yeah, let's start off with driver of the day, ladies and gents. So, there's a couple of options for me. First up, we of course have got Sebastian Vettel. 11th to 7th, a one-stop, the only man in the top 10 to do a one-stop. A great drive for him, especially considering the team is now definitely backing Leclerc. But is it enough to get it to him? I think it might be, based on the fact that nobody else had a spectacular weekend, and the fact that basically nobody stood out as a star. Other drivers that I've noted, Pierre Gasly, I thought had yet another good weekend. Sadly, or horrible news, his house has just been burgled, which is awful. Hopefully that doesn't throw him off his racing, as he's having a really, really good year this year, and proving to all those doubters, and this is really low, I just realised, that he has got what it takes to perform at the top level. This is too high. We were perfect already, but as I was saying, Pierre Gasly is option number 2. This is horrible viewing right now. Option number 3 is probably Lewis Hamilton. Lewis, if you're finishing 20-30 seconds ahead of second place, you've driven a stellar Grand Prix, there's no doubt about it, and I think you have to give credit where it's due. He's driven another good race, yes he's in the Merc, but I still think it is a quality performance, as I'm going to fiddle with this again. But if I had to pick of the 3, I reckon my money's on Vettel. He's getting shunned by the team, the relations get worse and worse each week, and I think he's done enough to prove, this week at least, that it was a strong performance for him. 7th place, one of his best of the year so far, so congratulations, he's going to be my driver of the day. Now the next team I want to talk about is Racing Point. An interesting question, could Perez or Stroll, whether you class Racing Point as a top team already, drive for a top team, you say, the likes of Ferrari or a Mercedes or a Red Bull in the future? They're both performing well this season. A 4th and 5th place finish in this Grand Prix proves once again that they are performing well. Now granted, they're the 3rd best team in the grid, but they're both putting out pretty damn solid performances. Even Lance Stroll, who's had a lot of criticism from myself and many others across the grid, are showing once and again that maybe he deserves a spot at the top team. He's done well this year. I mean, Lance is, I believe, 4th in the championship, right? No, 5th in the championship, maybe? I can't take that statistic exact. I think he's on 40 points. Don't hold that precisely. And then Perez, 30 years of age. He had an opportunity at McLaren at a very young age, 23, barely started his career. He'd had 2 years in the Sauber, thrown into the McLaren that was going back in 2013, got kicked out of the seat after 1 year, hasn't been given an opportunity since. He could also have been given an opportunity at Ferrari back in 2013, but they chose Kimi Raikkonen due to his strong performances. So, well, that would have been 2014. He's been unfortunate not to get a good drive, and if, say, Sainz or Leclerc doesn't work out, or maybe if Perez does get the boot because of the Vettel Racing Point setup that could occur, does he head to Red Bull in place of Alex Albon? I think that would be a fair switch once again. Perez brings a good amount of experience. He can definitely challenge Verstappen, I reckon. I don't think he's as quick as Ricciardo, but I think he's quicker than Albon. But I think that's because he has more experience. You think back to what Perez was like when he was 24, the age Albon is now. I think they're about equal, so I think, for me, the better option would be to go with Albon. For the reason being that Albon is future-proof. Perez is not. Perez has 3-4 years, maybe more at the top. Albon, they can get a good 5-6 years service out of him before they want to switch to another driver if somebody else pulls up. And later in today's episode, we will be talking about Alpha Tauri and what they're doing next, because who knows who could be driving for them in 2021. There's 7 candidates in total, and then probably a couple more that could dive in as well. But Perez and Stroll, do I want to see them in top teams? I'm interested to see Stroll drive at a top team, for the reason being that I think it'd just be really interesting to see. Can he perform? Because he's 21, he's the second, I say this often, he's the second youngest man in the grid. He's performing well. I think there's a quality driver in there. As much criticism as he gets for being a pay man, there is a quality driver deep down that needs to be found. And I reckon he deserves a shot at some stage. I don't know whether Aston Martin or Racing Point will ever be able to deliver him a world championship, but I think one day, maybe, if Russell move changes or Hamilton and Bottas have both retired, there could be a gap for Stroll. Ocon's moved on. He's used to a Mercedes power engine. He's still just 21 years of age. It would be an interesting setup. And I reckon he's probably third favourite to get the seat in the long-term future. Russell's number 1, Verstappen number 2, because Verstappen will jump ship to Mercedes in a heartbeat if the opportunity arises for championships. And I reckon Stroll might be the number 3 man. Ocon's no longer on the table. Pascal Wehrlein's no longer on the table. I reckon he's a good option. But one man that's not doing so well. Sebastian Vettel. Now, we did say, yes, driver of the day this weekend, but as a whole, he's not been on par this season, and the relationship between him and the team has been quickly deteriorating over the past couple of months. So a question has been begged. Could he be dropped mid-season? We've seen it before. Think back to Pierre Gasly, of course, just last year. We've had other incidents in the past. My brain has gone frozen, but you know exactly what I mean. Do I think there's a possibility he could be dropped? On performances? No. I think he's doing just enough on performances to warrant staying in the team. However, the negative situation that is being created in the team could cause him to leave early just so they can get out of tension and get a couple of months stability under themselves and a bit more positive energy in the team that is currently circulating. Now, this could be a win-win for all. If Vettel could get a seat elsewhere, it may be beneficial for him. However, I feel it's unlikely that a seat will become available of any quality in the coming future. And the other question that has to be asked is who could replace him? Because if you think about it, Ferrari can't take Sainz. Sainz won't leave McLaren yet until his contract is up. They can't take any top drivers like an Alex Albon even or something. No one's going to jump ship to Ferrari unless they're right lower. And even then, they're probably within contractual negotiations that forces them to stay at the team they're at. So that, in my eyes, leaves 2 drivers as options. Number 1, or maybe 3, Antonio Giovinazzi. Giovinazzi has always, for a while now, been a young Ferrari driver. He's done some tests with the team in the past, and I wouldn't be stunned to see him drive. I wouldn't be stunned to see him as a backup. I don't think he's quite the quality needed for a Ferrari driver, and I think most agree with that, especially based on the fact that they picked Sainz. And how many years left in the sport he has, I don't know, but there is no doubt that he is a decent driver, and like you've seen, Fisichella moved to Ferrari for half a year after Massa's injury. It wouldn't be a shocking move, and I think he would be deserving of a go. I think it'd be fun to see him have a go in the seat. The second pick will be Nico Hülkenberg. Hülkenberg, he's covered for Perez after the Racing Point incident, and it wouldn't be shocking to see Ferrari call on him. He's a good driver, he wants to get back in the seat, another German as well if you like that, and he's a clear number 2 with plenty of racing experience and quality that could bring consistent results for the team as they challenge against the Racing Points and against the McLarens as the season goes on. I think he'd be an interesting pick. I think I'd go for him over Gio, to be fair, actually. I think it would create less upset, and also it wouldn't leave Alpha without a seat, which would be problematic for the Ferrari team. Because if you look at their Formula 2 drivers, in Callum Eilert, in Robert Schwartzman, in Mick Schumacher, none of them are quite ready to jump up to Formula 1. They need to the end of this season. And to be honest, there's not plenty of other options. The only other man who is a Ferrari test driver that I think could jump into a seat is Pascal Wehrlein. Wehrlein could jump in either straight to Ferrari or to Alpha. I think what will more likely happen is Gio goes to Ferrari and then Pascal Wehrlein heads to Alfa Romeo to partner Kimi Raikkonen. Raikkonen could take the seat as he knows the team, but I don't think he will. I just don't think he's in the sport. A bit like Vettel, neither of them are having good years. I think they just want to be out of it for the moment. So I think for both of them, I think Giovinazzi's number one pick. No, probably Hülkenberg's number one pick, then Giovinazzi, and then Pascal Wehrlein. And if things get really desperate, maybe they call on Callum Ilott or Robert Shortsman. I mean, Mick Schumacher doesn't have a super license yet, so he can't join the team. They also have the likes of Froco, but he's never driven in an F1 race in his life, and jumping straight to Ferrari is quite a hit. So, if we're making a judgment call and burping through it, I think it's tough. It's very tough because Vettel is causing so much trauma at this team and so much anguish. Is it better to swap him for Giovinazzi or Hülkenberg? And I think it might be. Things are getting messy this year. Teams, yes, they want to keep their lineups, but things just aren't going well. Giovinazzi and Hülkenberg would both be grateful and would be a lot more progressive for the team. And I reckon it might just be the call. I wouldn't be surprised, but in a month or so, if things continue to deteriorate, I think I would make the call. Yes, Vettel is a four-time world champion. I respect that. But Hülkenberg did a good performance in the Racing Point. Giovinazzi is a promising driver. Yes, he's 26. So I think he deserves another chance. And maybe Vettel needs a break. Especially if he's going to go on and join Racing Point next year. It's a tough decision. It's a big decision. But it's certainly an interesting decision that will have to be made at some point. And speaking of drivers, we're going to move to Pierre Gasly. We're going to move to Pierre Gasly. Pierre Gasly is a very, very interesting one. Another strong performance this weekend. Qualified 10th, finished 9th in a car that is probably the 7th best on the grid. That is a very, very good performance once again. And it's, I think, his third time in Quali 3, at least his second, but maybe his third time in Quali 3, which is pretty good for a Toro Rosso driver, especially with how strong the grid is this year. So I'm very impressed with that. Do I think that he should be driving, and this is where we're going to link into our big topic of the day, in a section I want to have where we're going to talk about who should drive for a team next year. There's 10 teams, so we can run through them each time we do a Formula 1 podcast, which we do like every other week. So today, we're talking Alpha Tauri. Who should race for Alpha Tauri in 2021? And Gasly is a key part of the question as to who would be racing there. There are 7 men that I've considered with differing chances that could race for them in 2021. We'll start with the most likely and finish with the least likely. Or should we go the other way around? No, we'll start with the least likely. We'll start with the least likely. The least likely man to be racing for Toro Rosso or Alpha Tauri in 2021 at the 7 that I've picked is Sebastian Vettel. He is a test driver for both them and Red Bull. However, he has commitments in Formula E, but if an opportunity arose, drivers continue to have issues, he is an experienced man like Kvyat that would give them alternative option and is now a much more experienced driver than that he was 8 to 9 years ago when he first signed for the team. Do I think it's likely? No. I think Red Bull and Toro Rosso AlphaTauri want to remain staying as a development team. Yes, they're sister teams now, but I think they would rather stick and still have those younger drivers than someone aging that doesn't have a whole lot of potential. So Buemi, I reckon there's a 10 to 15% chance that Buemi could be in the seat in AlphaTauri for 2021. 6th place, most likely to be racing for AlphaTauri in 2021, is pretty tight. But I'm going to say 6th place is Alex Albon. And the reason for this is I think he will be Red Bull or bust. I think there's a couple of promising drivers coming through in the Red Bull Young Academy that could take seats in the next season. And for that reason, if Albon doesn't stay at Red Bull, I think he'll be looking elsewhere on the grid for his seat next year. Whether that be Haas or something, I don't know. But I think he's probably got a 25% chance of racing in a seat next year that is in those AlphaTauri and a beautiful livery. Let's just say a beautiful livery. But I think it's unlikely once again that Albon is racing there next year. Now, 5th place. I'm running these through as I go, but in 5th place is going to be Sergio Sette Camara. I really rate this guy. A strong couple of years in Formula 2. He's become their main test driver this year ahead of Buemi. 21 or 22 years of age. Got a good potential. Would be a good driver to try out if drivers aren't coming through that they want. However, The fact that Kvyat was picked over him last year indicates that maybe he isn't quite up to the quality. I don't know whether that was because they wanted to save the seat for future drivers coming through, or because the fact he didn't have a super license, or just because the fact the likes of Helmut Marko didn't believe it, or Todd didn't believe in him enough. I do not know. However, the questions have to be raised. Why wasn't he picked for a 2020 seat over Kvyat, who is not a young driver in development? He's 26, 27 years of age. So for that reason, I'd say there is a 30%, 25 to 30% chance Sete Camara, as much as I like him, will be in the Alpha Tauri seat next year. So that leaves 4 drivers. Yes, because we've done Albon. My brain's gone frazzled. But at number 4, I'm going to say 4th most likely to be racing at Alpha Tauri next year is Danny Kvyat. Kvyat has not had a great year at the team. He's been vastly outperformed by Gasly, and as someone that is supposed to be consistently bringing at least a few points to the table, he is not doing that on a consistent basis, and I think it is unlikely that he will retain his seat for next year's drive. I think there are 2 drivers coming through that could take his seat in particular, who are most likely 3 and 2 on this list, or probably actually 3 and 1 on this list. And I think, yes, Kvyat, has a 50 to 60% chance of racing for them next year. My money is not on him, and I think there are other drivers who will be ahead of him in the pecking order. I don't see it as impossible for him to get a seat, or in the future. I think maybe he's the kind of driver that Panthera could link to, who have strong links to SMP, the Russian team, for that reason. Also, I wouldn't be surprised to see him at the likes of a Haas or an Alfa Romeo due to his past relationship with Ferrari, but I think he's the 4th choice to be driving for Alpha Tauri, at least, in next season's calendar. So that leaves 3, and in at number 3, it's Yuki Tsunoda. I didn't know about this man until a couple of weeks ago. He had a mediocre start. Let's backtrack a second. In 2019, he was racing in the Japanese Formula 4, where he, I believe, finished 3rd in the championship, earning him a seat in Formula 2 this year. Helmut Marko has said to him that if he finishes top 4, earning him enough super license points to race for Alpha Tauri next season, he can have a seat. However, I don't think this 100% confirms him for next year. First up, he has to achieve that. He is currently 4th in the standings, but Formula 2 is very competitive this year. We've got Lundgaard, we've got Schwartzman, we've got Eilert, Schumacher, plenty more, Deletschles, Mazepin. There's a lot of top drivers this year in Formula 2 competing for a small number of seats, and I think that maybe he may miss out on the top 4, and maybe on the super license points that he needs. Now, this doesn't mean to me that he won't drive for them in the future, it just means that he won't drive for them in 2021. However, if I'm putting a number to it, I'm saying there is a 65 to 70% chance that Tsunoda will race for them next year. And that leaves 2 men. My 2 favourites and my 2 picks to be driving for them next year, because I think Tsunoda will just miss out on a seat. My number 2 most likely driver for Alpha Tauri is Pierre Gasly. He's not number 1 for the reason being that if an opportunity arises elsewhere, I think he is the best candidate in the lower half of the grid to take that opportunity. However, the fact that Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren, Renault, Racing Point all have their lineups filled, and the only possible spot he can take is that for Red Bull seat of Alex Albon. I think it is unlikely, based off the recenciness of his dropping, that he will join there. Therefore, I would anticipate, considering he's bringing good results and points to the team and helping with development more than Kvyat is, I think he will likely retain his seat for the 2021 seat, allowing him to have an experienced versus youthful driver in the seat. Now, Tsunoda had an opportunity and still will have an opportunity to take that seat. However, I think it probably comes down to what Tsunoda does. Gasly has a 75 to 80% chance of having that seat. They won't take both my number 1 and my number 3. They'll take just one of them, is what I expect, unless Gasly leaves. And my number 1 pick to be racing for Alpha Tauri is Yuri Vips. Yuri Vips, a promising young driver, had an up and down career at times, but is currently racing, I believe, in the Super Formula for Team Mugen. And you may think that's a bit weird. He's out of the way, he's not really doing anything there, but I think the reason that he's racing over there, if you look at past drivers, Red Bull and Toro Rosso and Alpha have in the past sent a number of drivers out there. Pierre Gasly raced there in the past. Dan Ticktum raced there in the past. It's often been a place that they send that driver that they're looking to get 1 year's more experience before they stick them in the seat. And for that reason, I think Vips is following a similar trend and probably has an 85% chance of racing for the team in 2021. Now, yes, he is very, very young, but I think Helmut Marko wants to roll the dice and try something different. And for that reason, he is my favourite on this week's choices for who's going to be driving in number 1 spot. Vips. Number 2 is going to be Pierre Gasly. Number 3, Yuki Tsunoda. All of them have a good shot at the seat next year. Number 4, Danny Kvyat. And after that, they are starting to look on the ropes. Comment down below who you think will be driving for Alpha Tauri in 2021. It's an interesting combo. They're my thoughts laid out. You've seen it, what order I've put them in. But it's certainly an interesting conversation. But now it's time to move on to our next section as we camera. And yeah, where was I? Now that we sorted that, it's time to move on to our second section of the episode. Yeah, that was a little bit jointed. So I wanted more milk. But moving on, we have a new section. I've been playing with head-to-head, best of 3, pick your teammates, start, sub and reserve. Today we're trying something different. Today we're trying to pick your lineup. What you're getting offered is 3 lineups of drivers with similar abilities, pros and cons to each, and you have to make your pick. If you had a car and an F1 team, which duo would you choose? You can't mix and match between the teams, you have to pick a team straight. And today we have an interesting selection. Now, if you want to leave suggestions for these in the future, please leave comments down below. I'd love to get replies on this in the future, but I know that we're very small, so we'll see how that goes. But our first duo for today, we've got Lewis Hamilton and we have Nico Rosberg. The return of that 2014 or 2013 to 2016 combo would be back together. The pros, Lewis Hamilton is a world-class driver, arguably the best in the sport at the moment. The cons, Nico Rosberg has been out the sport for 5 years and also they don't have the best relationship. Can you get past that and the fact that Nico hasn't driven for 5 years with an aging duo, or would you want to go for something a little younger? Now, our second duo sadly doesn't offer a younger option either. It's Fernando Alonso and Kimi Raikkonen, 2 world champions from 2005 through to 2007 at 38 and 40 years of age. They too are not at their peaks. However, Alonso will return to the sport in 2021 and Kimi is still in a car as of now for Alfa Romeo. The pros, they're world champions. We know they have quality. We know how they have pace. The cons, they're not what they once were. And sometimes they may be pulling out frustration and toxicity at a team. And then our final lineup of the 3 is a little bit weaker. No world champions. We've got Charles Leclerc and we have Nico Hülkenberg. A third driver. Each team has a currently retired driver in their lineups. The positives of this one, a little bit younger, a little bit fresher, and still got a lot to prove. The cons, well, they don't have a world championship, which the others have about 8 to 12. The others have 12 between them. Only Vettel has stopped them in the past 15 years. So that says a lot. First up, who do you guys pick? Is it Hamilton and Rosberg, Alonso and Raikkonen, or Charles Leclerc and Hülkenberg? But let's run through these and we're going to run through my decisions. You know, when we have guests, we have guests. But today, it's all on my shoulders. So let's kick it off. Hamilton and Rosberg. I think I would take them over Alonso and Raikkonen. I think Hamilton brings a whole lot to the car in development. And I think that Alonso and Raikkonen can start to get toxic, as we've seen in their later age. And I think there will be a concern that that would happen once again. So for that reason, I'm going to cut those 2 quite early. Now, Hamilton and Rosberg. Hamilton, arguably one of the best, or arguably the best in history, let alone the sport currently. I think you have to throw him into consideration. The question would be, I think there is mutual respect between Rosberg and Hamilton to say, we are both world-class drivers, can we race this out fair? But what if things go wrong? You think back to Catalonia 2016 when there was that big incident. Who's going to be to blame? Who's going to get that number 1 seat? Would somebody get preference? Would they be butting heads? Alternatively, with this other combo of Charles Leclerc and Nico Hülkenberg, you have a clear number 1 and a clear number 2. Hülkenberg, despite being 32 years of age, has a hell of a lot to prove as a driver. Proved he had quality the other weekend when he raced at Silverstone, finishing in what I think was 8th place. Meanwhile, Charles Leclerc clearly outperforming the quality of the Ferrari at the moment, which is huge to see. 4th in the Drivers' Championship, despite, I believe, 2 retirements now already this season. He's a strong candidate as a future world champion, maybe for Ferrari, if they can pull a decent car together. and arguably has a better future than Lewis Hamilton or Nico Rosberg. So I think when we're weighing this up, there's a big toss-up. I think the best way to look at this, actually, I don't know what you guys would do, but for me, Fernando and Kimi is out of the question. So then the question becomes, how do you rate these other drivers? Lewis is a 9 out of 10 for me. He's the best on grid, but he's a bit old, and there is a concern that he could clash with Rosberg. Rosberg is probably a 6 out of 10. He's been out of the sport for a while, but he is a world championship, and similarly, there is that issue with clashing with his teammate, Lewis Hamilton. In comparison, Charles Leclerc is probably an 8 out of 10. He's not the same ability as Hamilton, but if he can be put in a car that can thrive, he has an opportunity to really prove his true worth. Meanwhile, Hülkenberg is still an experienced driver, a GP2 champion. Despite never having won a podium, is hugely respected in the sport, and was thought and could have been one if he had been picked over Hamilton back in 2013. So both drivers have a shot at winning Grand Prix. All four of them could win Grand Prix. And I think what it comes down to is, if I was saying Hülkenberg, I would probably give him a 7 out of 10. So do I want a 9 and a 6 that could have a taut relationship, or an 8 and a 7? And my answer, my pick for this week, this is actually quite tough. I want to see you guys' comments down below on what you're picking for this. I'm going to go for Charles Leclerc and Nico Hülkenberg. Leave your comments down below as to what you think of that decision. But I'm going to not take Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso, Kimi Räikkönen or Nico Rosberg in this week's Pick Your Duo. I'm going to go, I think Pick Your Lineup sounds like a better title. I'm going to go for Charles Leclerc and Nico Hülkenberg. I think those two would make a good pair as a number 1 and number 2 driver. They both have a lot to prove in the sport, and I think they can both progress and improve the car. And this leads us nicely onto our third section. We're flying through things now, and we've got Twitter. You know what we like, the best and the worst of football, or not football Twitter this week, Formula 1 Twitter. And we're starting off. This is a long conversation by @Davy Verstappen. We're not going to run through the whole thing of it, but this one tweet that he brought up was about the likes of Lance Stroll, Nick De Vries and Nicholas Latifi. And he has said, it's too sad that Nick De Vries doesn't have a chance in Formula 1. For sure he's better than Latifi. F2 in 2019 proves this, and even in the start of the season, in a different comparison, you've got to say that drivers improve, as Lance Stroll didn't deserve a shot when he got into the seat a few years ago, but has now really improved in comparison. So, we've got two arguments going on here. First up, does Stroll deserve a seat? And second up, does Nick De Vries deserve a seat, or Latifi in Formula 1? Let's start with Stroll. Stroll has undoubtedly improved and earned his spot as a Formula 1 driver, but I think there's comparability between Stroll and Latifi when you actually think about it. There's a couple of difficulties, but I think none are too dissimilar of this trio. Stroll, yeah, he didn't have a great junior career in the slightest, and he got into Formula 1 on one reason alone: money, not merit, which is a shame. But since then, in this 2020 season, he has proved his worth as a quality driver, and I think could continue to do so into the future. And as I've said earlier in this episode, I think he has potential to maybe even be a race winner, maybe even a world champion. So for that reason, I think Lance deserves a seat. I think I would give it to him 100% now. But in the past, would I have done? No, I think this is the first year that he's truly proved his worth. But the question has to be asked, would he be winning Formula 2 this year? And I think there's a fair possibility of that. I think, even if Stroll couldn't have got a seat in Formula 1 straight away, he would have still been able to race in F2 this year, or in the past few years, and I think he probably would have at least competed in the championship to a high level. I mean, last year's championship wasn't too competitive. You had Nick De Vries, Jack Aitken. You look at where the likes of Aitken are finishing this year. This year's F2 is a lot more competitive than last year's. So for that reason, I think Stroll does deserve a seat in Formula 1. I think he would have proved his worth. Now, Latifi versus Nick De Vries. Nick De Vries beat Latifi in the F2 Championship, agreed, but Nick De Vries is 26. The F2 Championship is meant for youngsters, who are maybe 23 at max. People look at Delatres and say he's a bit old for this good part of the series at some stage. So I think you have to consider that maybe Nick was just too old and maybe didn't have the talent that they had proved, and the reason that he had won the championship was because of the reason that just because he had an age advantage over everybody. It's like putting the gifted and talented 13-year-olds versus the average 16-year-olds. The average 16-year-old would probably still win if you were playing in a sport. So I think that's what you have to consider, and the reason that Nick didn't get a seat. You look at what options they had. Mercedes could have said to Williams, we want Nick in this seat, and given a bit of cash there. Not as much as Latifi would bring, but a bit of cash. Alternatively, there are other areas that maybe if Nick was really that good, he could have got a seat. Alpha Tauri could have snapped him up from Mercedes, who weren't hugely excited over the prospect of him. Maybe even someone like I suppose Renault had Ricciardo and Ocon coming in, but there were seats available. He could have gone to the likes of Alpha. Maybe Ferrari could have picked him up as a young driver. Nobody picked him up as a young driver, and Mercedes just shipped him off to Formula E, which suggests to me that he wasn't as good as people are making out, and that maybe he didn't deserve a seat in Formula 1, or no more than Nicholas Latifi. Latifi is 2 years younger than De Vries, so that's got to give in a bit of consideration when comparing the two of them. And I don't think Latifi has been awful. You compare to some of the drivers that Williams have had in recent years. You look at Sergei Sorokin, and when Lance Stroll first started, he's putting out okay results. Yes, he's at the back of the grid, but he's competing with the Alphas, he's competing with the Hasses on a consistent basis, and he's not a long way off the back, which has been an issue in the past. I think he's equal to Stroll in his first season. They're not the best. Yes, they're paid, but the big difference between Stroll and Latifi is Stroll was 18, Latifi was 24. So for me, Latifi does deserve an opportunity. Second in Formula 2, Lando finished second in Formula 2, Sergio Perez finished second in Formula 2. A lot of top drivers, I mean, you don't want to win the X Factor, you want to finish second when it comes to the X Factor. This could be the same. So for that reason, I think Latifi deserves at least 2 years in the Williams seat to try and prove something, and I think he needs to be that best for the rest. He needs to be the best of tier 3. Alpha Haas Williams, he needs to be winning those battles, or at least be second to George. If he can do that, for me, beat Giovinazzi, beat Magnussen, for me, he has had a quality enough season for his first year, and I think he deserves a seat in 2021 if he can progress on that again. I think there's a possibility that he can continue and deserve a seat in Formula 1. And I always stand by that opinion that Latifi, yes, he's a paid driver, but second in Formula 2, that is deserving of an opportunity of a seat. So that's where I lie the line there. And then we've got this, a really interesting little thing. I'm going to flash up on screen for you guys now. It's a big document this guy is writing out, suggesting in what order all the drivers deserve seats in Formula 1. And we're going to have a run through this, take a look and see what we think. So, first Hamilton, I've got to say that I agree. Apologies, I'm not going to get much of my face in this part of the podcast. But at number 2, we have Max Verstappen. This is based off of who could race in the 2021 grid as of yet. Second is Max Verstappen. I think nobody is going to argue with that once again. I think that is a clear top 2. Then at number 3, he's gone for Fernando Alonso, and he's stated, in his opinion, he's a great driver who will be able to perform on a high level next year. He is just insane in everything that has 4 wheels. Agreed, Alonso is an amazing driver. However, I do not think that next year he will be the 3rd best driver on the grid. I think there are better drivers out there and currently that have been racing in Formula 1 for the last couple of years that are younger as well, that have more ability than Fernando. Otherwise, we would probably maybe still see him in at least some form of a seat in 2019 and 2020. So for that reason, that's the first disagreement. At number 4, they've gone for Daniel Ricciardo, and I think 4th is about right for Danny Rick. I think he is criminally not underrated. I think people rate him at the right level, but I think he's always in an underperforming car. Hopefully McLaren can pull out some good results and become a strong car for the future, and I think Danny Rick could finally have a shot at some more victories since 2018. And I think 4th is where he deserves to be right now. I think he's ahead of Alonso, but I think there's a driver that is a long way down on this list that should be a lot higher. You may have spotted him and you may agree. And number 5, they've gone for Sergio Perez. Yeah, they've said he's been good in the last 5 years. I agree with that. Do I think he's deserving of the number 5 spot? No, otherwise maybe he'd have taken that seat instead of like Valtteri Bottas or other seats that have become available. So for that reason, I think maybe he's more like a 7 or an 8, and I think a couple of the next drivers I would put ahead. And we're going to start running through these quite quickly, because otherwise this is going to take a long time. But number 6, Sebastian Vettel. He is a title-winning champion, but has failed to prove himself in the recent Ferrari. I think a 6th is about right for Sebastian at the moment. I think he trumps Alonso. But I think there are a couple of drivers ahead of him, the likes of Ricciardo and maybe a couple more, the likes of Bottas, I think, who jump him in the championship. Bottas is that 8th place man for this guy, or 7th place man, overshadowed by Hamilton, but consistent and did well in the Williams. I completely agree. I'd probably put him 5th. He's not on Lewis's level, but the top two in Lewis and Max are so far ahead of everybody else at the moment that I think Valtteri is underrated as a consistent performer on a regular basis and gets more criticism than he deserves. Yes, he doesn't have all that many wins, but that's because Lewis is favoured in most situations, and I think you have to accept that Valtteri is a strong driver, both from his performances at Williams and his performances at Mercedes. Now, this is the one that I take the most argument with. Charles Leclerc in 8th. I think Charles Leclerc is arguably the third best driver on the grid right now. I think Lewis is top, then Max, then Charles. Charles is putting out top performances in a shitty Ferrari right now. In a shitty Ferrari. He performed superbly against Marcus Ericsson in the Sauber and has consistently proved that he is a rapid driver and a very, very talented man for the age that he is. So for that reason, I want to jump Leclerc up all the way to number 3. He makes my podium. The rest of this lot, is there anyone that stands out? Norris and Sainz in 9th and 10th, Albon and Raikkonen in 11th and 12th, I agree with that. Russell and Gasly and Ocon 13, 14, 15, Stroll in 16. I think I all agree with them, and I think that top 16 all deserve seats in next year's Formula 1. Then we have the bottom 5, we've got Kvyat in 17th, I'd agree with that. Giovinazzi in 18th, I'd agree with that. Magnussen in 19th, Latifi in 20th, and Grosjean in 21st. I think a lot of that is warranted, so maybe that bottom 5 or 6 could be flipped about a bit. Maybe I put Latifi bottom, and then probably I don't rate Giovinazzi that highly, so there's a couple that I would jump about, and maybe Raikkonen would go a bit lower due to his recent performances. But as a whole, I do agree with this list and find it very interesting. If you want me to bring this up with a future person in the podcast, let me know. But for now, all I'm going to say to this guy, I haven't got his out on here, I'm afraid. Sorry, mate. Leclerc and Alonso need to switch. Other than that, it's a solid list. And that's where we're almost at the end of today's podcast. For a personal one, first up, I think I've been flying at 1,000 words a minute, which is crazy. But we will finish off today with our quiz. Everybody likes a quiz. We've got 5 questions, no guests, so it is up to you guys to see how you score. Leave your comments down below. I'll also split this off as a small section of the podcast, which I'm trying to get back to doing. We've got 5 questions, and I wanted to pick a team. I wanted to do a team-based thing. Today, we are doing Alfa Romeo and Sauber. Next week, we'll do Alpha Tauri and Toro Rosso, and so forth and so forth. 5 questions, all multiple choice. Let me know how you do. Let's dive into it. So, Sauber, who has finished the highest in the standings in either an Alfa Romeo or a Sauber in history? Is it A, Kimi Raikkonen, B, Robert Kubica, or C, Nick Heidfeld? I'm not going to answer these now. You'll have to... Actually, no, I'll answer them at the end of the quiz to make things a bit simpler for you. But have a think and jot down your answer on a piece of paper. Question number 2. Who is the last Sauber driver to finish on the podium in Formula 1? Was it A, Sergio Perez, and this is including Alfa Romeo? Is it B, Charles Leclerc, or is it C, Kamui Kobayashi? Again, keep noting down. Question 3. How many world champions have raced for Formula 1 Sauber? Now, we've named one in Kimi Raikkonen already. Is that all? Has there been 2, or has there been 3? Stick your answer down on the piece of paper, and we'll jump forth to question number 4. Again, Kimi is coming up. I suppose he spans the beginning and end of his career here. But Kimi debuted for Sauber all the way back in which year? 2001, 2002, or 2003? And for our final question, who is the only British driver in history to have raced for Sauber in Formula 1? Is it A, Paul di Resta, B, Jenson Button, or C, Johnny Herbert? Now, take a moment whilst you're doing this to go for that subscribe button while you make sure and confirm all your answers. I don't think the questions will be anywhere, but click back if you want to have a second to listen through, because we're about to pause the video if you need to. That's another thing. That was not good English, but it's time to read out the answer. The answer to question 1, as I said, let me know how many you score. Who is the highest finishing position ever in a Alfa Romeo or Sauber? The answer was B, Robert Kubica, finishing 4th in the 2007 championship. His teammate Nick Heidfeld finished 5th, and Kimi has never finished, I believe, in the top half when he has raced for Sauber. Question 2. Who is the last Sauber driver to win or finish on the podium in Formula 1? The answer was C, Kamui Kobayashi, who did it way back in the 2012 season. Sergio Perez did also score a podium in that year, but Kamui's was later in the season, and Charles, due to the dominance of the Mercedes in recent years, was unable to get a podium whilst he was driving in the Sauber. Question 3. How many world champions have raced for Sauber? They don't have to have won there. The answer is C, 3. We've got Kimi Raikkonen, we've got Sebastian Vettel, who raced for BMW Sauber way back in 2007, I believe. Maybe 2006. 2007. And then we also have Jacques Villeneuve all the way back in the early 2000s. So the answer to that is C, 3. Question 4. Kimi Raikkonen debuted for Sauber in which year? The answer is, of course, A, 2001, taking his career to a total of 17 seasons already. He only has a few more races before he actually overtakes Rubens Barrichello as the most races in history. I believe he's got 12, or no, I think he's got 5 to close the gap. That might just be it. So he may do it this season. And then the final question at the end of today's podcast. Who is the only British driver to have raced for Sauber in history? The answer is not Paul di Resta. He was a Force India man. The answer was not Jenson Button. He was at McLaren, BAR and many more. And the answer was in fact C, Johnny Herbert, the now turned commentator, raced for them back in the mid-90s. And he completes today's quiz. Let me know how many you scored as I do the messiest outro in history out of 5. Let me know in the comments down below. Suggest questions for next week's quiz. Suggest ideas. Leave your thoughts on Twitter. At me with things that you want to say and get in this video for opinions. If you want a guest star on this, I want guests and I'd love to have you on. And if you have suggestions for the head-to-head or pick your duos, let me know in the comments down below as well. Go subscribe. Leave a like if you haven't already. And until next time, go subscribe.